Perfect. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the Web Accessibility Risk and the Roadmap to Compliance webinar. My name is Amit Mehta. I'm with Omnisend, and I'm here joined with three amazing panelists and partners today providing their expertise. I want to first introduce Andrew Podekowitz, Rosenwald from SeaMonster, and Michelle Landis from Accessible 360. Andrew, to start, you're right to the right on my screen. I'll let you do a quick overview of what Overdose is.
Great, thanks very much, Amit. So my name is Andrew Podekowitz. I'm Director of Global Partnerships and Brand Marketing for Overdose. We are a global full-service digital agency with a commerce focus, working across a number of tech stacks, including as far as backends, Magento, Shopify, BigCommerce, commerce tools, and shopware. And really, ensuring as an organization that we are aligned with the right and best technologies in the space to support our clients, and that we're getting the most out of not just the technology, but the team that supports it. And that's really what sort of the partnership role in my world looks like. Thanks,
hey, Andrew, totally apologize for butchering your last name.
No, it's all it is more common than not. So it's I appreciate it. It's a difficult one.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Paul, I'll let you do a quick intro to SeaMonster.
Right on. Thanks, Amit, and thanks for having SeaMonster involved in this webinar. Great to be part of a panel of other people that seem to have the same care about web accessibility that we do. So SeaMonster Studios is I would say, smaller boutique design and development agency based in the Northwest. We span an array of verticals and hang our hat in the Shopify world when it comes to e-commerce, and WordPress when e-commerce is not involved. Our guys that turn the screws, kind of like the weird stuff out of the box, isn't necessarily their flavor of choice. So building apps and creating operational efficiency type solutions is right up our alley. So thanks for having us.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. And Michelle from Accessible 360.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Michelle Landis. I'm co-founder here at A360, as we call ourselves. A360 is a court-certified auditing company. My team would not expect me to be the nerd on a webinar, but as far as accessibility topics today, you can think of me as a little bit of a legal strategy nerd, if you will. And then we'll talk about lots of really interesting things. But what A360 is known for is we're not an agency. A bunch of us used to work in the agency world, but we partner with agencies on shared clients initiatives where they care about accessibility and they want to go about it the proper way. We've been involved in numerous landmark cases. We're only working on the defense side, so we're working on behalf of our clients. It's important, and I think we're going to get into that. But I'm super excited to be here with Andrew and Paul, and Amit, I'll turn it back over to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Michelle. And so for those that are attending, the format here will be more of a fireside chat format where, I'll start with a question, share it with my panelists to get their expertise, but also for the attendees, if you guys have any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer in the midst of a discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A button, and my colleague Lindsay will be reviewing that, and we'll make sure we get that question answered as well. We want to be able to provide you guys the value and understanding of what web accessibility is, so therefore you guys are prepared for it, not only for most e-commerce businesses, their busiest time of year, but also in the future as well. So to really start the conversation, I'd like to start with you, Michelle. Like, what does web accessibility mean, and why should brands/merchants really care about it?
Well, great question, loaded one, kind of. I'll start with our simple definition of website accessibility, and that is the inclusive practice of removing any barriers to the design and content and functionality of a website, a mobile app, Internet of Things product, anything like that, any digital product, so that all users can use that digital product. And the way that we go about that, obviously, is through live user auditing. If it wasn't obvious, that's what we're about. But if you think about digital accessibility really at the core, it's a civil right. There's a civil right to have access to all information. And in this digital age, we need to make sure that all digital information is also accessible to everybody.
Great, thank you. Paul, I know I really found out about this while I was walking a show floor with you, at a conference, and you were really discussing, from a SeaMonster standpoint, how you've been working with clients on this issue. So I'd love to get some insights from you as well, and what you guys are seeing at SeaMonster, and what does web accessibility, when you're working with your clients, what are you highlighting on your end?
Yeah, for sure. I think it boils down to a few things. One is doing the right thing. So if you were to think about having a brick and mortar location, you wouldn't open it without a wheelchair ramp. You want to have anybody that's interested in what you're selling be able to get in and have access to seeing and looking around. And so if you apply that concept to the internet, it's the same philosophy, right? So we want to make it accessible, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because there's lots more customers potentially, and it helps with organic SEO and for all sorts of reasons. But at the core, it's about ethics, I think, and the way that you approach business, and just making sure that you have first of all and foremost, that a merchant's knowledgeable about what the challenges are and what the issues are, and then making sure that they have a plan in place to help them achieve as close to accessibility as we can, or to the level that they would like.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Andrew, would love to get your, knowing Overdose, multiple agencies that you guys have in your network. Love to hear what you guys are hearing on the street, especially from e-commerce merchants, and how you're positioning it for your clients as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Paul said 100%. And I think, it took a while, and I think we've all been pretty late to the game on the agency and brand side to get our properties accessible. And, I know Michelle and others have been beating the drum for much longer than we have. And I think when you consider, sort of, as Paul said, the traditional brick and mortar approach and what the ADA requirements are there, and what you want to do to ensure folks have that your stores are accessible. You have your standards, your wheelchair ramps, your aisles 42 inches apart at minimum for wheelchairs. And there's things that are pretty straightforward and relatively intuitive in a brick and mortar environment that provide for accessibility. And I think early on in digital, we all on the agency side and on the brand side didn't fully appreciate what that meant for a digital property. And I think we sort of thought naively early on, when we were starting to sort of recognize this was something that we needed to address, that it would be give us the 5 or 10 tips that we need to avoid to make sure that our sites are not things that we need to do to make the site accessible. And it's frankly, it's not as simple as that. It's much more complex. And unless you are an accessibility ADA trained, certified person who knows precisely what's needed on the site, few agencies are equipped to do it alone. We're certainly not. We absolutely partner with folks like Michelle and A360 to ensure that we're understanding what needs to be done, but at the same time, learning along the way. So for future projects, we're closer to that sort of accessibility standard than we used to be at launch.
Right. And well, where would you have learned it? Right. I have a son who just graduated as a full stack web developer. The only reason they covered accessibility in it is because we sent 2 auditors over for 2 hours on, career day, and kind of talked to them about careers and development. It isn't taught in school. So in the agency, all agency designers and developers defense, I don't know of a school that teaches accessible design as part of learning how to, how to be a developer, either on desktop or on mobile. So where would you learn it?
Yeah, and I think just to add something there, the naivete that we all had back, when this sort of a movement started in earnest in the agency world, there was often a feeling of, when you're working with a merchant and client, working through what a scope looks like and what the project looks like, it was sort of like, what'll it cost to get ADA compliant, and how long will it take us to get there? And we'll get to that at some point, but it's not, it was never a top priority for most of our merchants or projects back early on. And it was a struggle from there, of course, to get them where they need to be.
Yeah.
Paul, any insight on your end? I wanted to make sure I included you, and I do have a follow-up question for the panel as well. And I know, Michelle, talking to you last week, I learned about the standard, but Paul, I wanted to make sure you got a moment to chime in if there was a nugget that you had on your end.
I mean, I think they're, spot on with what they're saying. So I don't have a ton more to add. I think that just making sure that people have the understanding. I mean, when you and I spoke about it, my assumption, because we're having conversations about it regularly with our merchants and clients, is that, more people are knowing more and more about it. And it's more common. And what I found out talking to you was that, you felt like there was still a massive gap out there, and people that really weren't dialed into, the seriousness of it and how it impacts, their website and everything about their business. So, having these conversations are great. And I think, bringing awareness is the biggest thing.
Definitely. Thanks, Paul. Michelle, now last week when we were speaking, you had said that the current standard, how long has it been in place? It's not a recent standard, right? It's been a few years. Is that correct? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, about 22. So the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, put forth an initiative on accessibility, and it was, I think, 22 years ago now. And it was called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. In other words, a list of success criteria, a list of tests. We call it WCAG or WCAG. If I'm talking to people in other countries, they call it WCAG, or they call it, whatever, but it's WCAG. Even though that name has web in it, those concepts in it, the success criteria, the tests that we perform, we're testing for the same things on mobile apps. You just have to realize that when, 22 years ago, we didn't have mobile apps. Just like ADA was put into place, we didn't have the internet. So the Americans with Disabilities Act does not have anything in it, zero language, that speaks to standards or that speaks to any legal requirement for digital accessibility. That might be the first myth buster I can provide the listeners today. I think a lot of people are understanding that people call it ADA compliance, but to be extremely clear, there's no specific language in the Americans with Disabilities Act that was put into law in 1990 that talks about digital properties. Real quick, I'll round out kind of the conversation of standards, and then you tell me back, or if there's any questions from the audience, if I explained it succinctly enough. In the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title I is employment. So you can't discriminate in employment practices. That one is the elephant in the room, in my opinion, because a lot of people are focused on their website or their mobile app, but they outsource or they don't know what they're doing for their careers page, right? HR takes care of that, or marketing takes care of that, or somebody else takes care of it. And a lot of those portals are not offering equitable access. So that isn't necessarily just a digital access barrier, it's an EEOC issue. And so love to pick that conversation up someday about that, because there's a whole bunch of things that go along with employment, onboarding people, if they're getting their benefit information in an accessible format and so on. So then Title II of the ADA is public entities, and that's the government and anybody funded by the government. So in our practice with agencies and with shared clients, it's government agencies of any size, and then also healthcare and public education, K through 12, and colleges and universities where you can fill out a FAFSA and send a kid to school. So Title II entities, the public entities, there is a federal law requiring them to be accessible. And it's not the ADA, it's this obscure law called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Two amendments made in the year 1998. One of the amendments is called Section 508. One is called Section 504. The way to keep it straight in your head is Section 508 is for government. Section 504 is for those that get their funding for their program from the government. And those are the ones that adopted the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as their new refreshed standard back in 2018 in January. So in 2017, they made a one-year notice. And then in 2018, they adopted the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.0 and level AA. And we should talk to the guys about levels and versions. And that is still the standard for public entities. Excuse me. Since then, an updated version, in other words, like Windows, every time there's a version that comes out, 2.1 came out 3-4 years ago now, and it carried with it some additional tests. So it's not different then. That's, I think, I'm at the question that you're asking. You're always building. So it isn't that 2.0 went away. It's that 2.1 brought in, 3 brand new guidelines, mostly have to do with mobile, right? New input modalities. And as the fancy designers and cool developers come up with more things, there's more tests that come out to make sure that they offer equitable access. So
in our world, we might consider the 2.1 has better features, right?
yeah, it does. I mean, it's more updated, right? It's how it's how we interact with the apps and stuff that we're dealing with. So it's better.
Well, and it's an always evolving process. I think there's always going to be layers on top of it. And that's why we're telling our merchants, always have a plan in place and stay up to date and have your checks and balances so that as things evolve, you're evolving with it.
And I think, guys, you guys are probably leading in, or you've already touched onto the second question, like where I wanted to go with it is for our audience as well is, and I know, Michelle, you talked about how it's constantly building as technology builds as well. As of right now, if we say present day, we put a pin in it, we say right now, what are the standards of accessibility and what does it take to reach them? And I know it's 2 different questions. I know, Michelle, you're going to look at it from obviously from a legal perspective, but Paul and Andrew, I'd like to loop that in as well, because you guys are having conversation, loop you guys in as well, I should say, because you guys are having conversations with merchants. So I know that from a developer standpoint, you guys are going to be maybe answering this question a little bit differently. But if I could start with Michelle, I know you've touched on it, but right now, if one were to say we take a snapshot in time, what are right now the current standards of accessibility? Yeah.
You want a specific answer.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, our position at A360 is this, and this is very consistent with subject matter experts in accessibility. I would always conduct audits to 2.1. We have for years at A360. That way, the agency and the shared clients are informed on all the potential issues that could be there. Now, if you're asking me, what do I think the legal is, then keep in mind that the demand letters, the lawsuits that can come, they're going to ask for now 2.1 because the lawyers know that was released, right? They started asking for it right away, even if it wasn't appropriate for the digital product, in my opinion. But it is very common to reach a settlement agreement to get a letter of conformance to 2.0 level AA. Most of our clients, they get an audit to 2.1. And then if there's a reason to get a first letter of conformance to 2.0, then we do that. And then continue. And then we do those other 12 tests and, they're remediating on those 12 tests, and then they can reach a letter of conformance to 2.1. It's about what's doing appropriate for both the business and also, the end users, right? One important thing that I want to say before I toss it around to the guys to contribute is there, the list of the WCAG guidelines, most subject matter experts in accessibility will break those into levels of severity. And what I mean by this is there's going to be some issues that are complete blockers. Somebody who is blind using screen reader technology like NVDA or JAWS, they could be completely blocked. Somebody who is a keyboard only user and they can't use a mouse, they could get, keyboard only trap, and they can't go any further through the UX. Those are, critical issues. And we feel, and so do our agency partners and our clients, that those need to be fixed. And then there's this level 2 kind of priority level 2, which are very serious. It makes using the application or the website very difficult. And then there's warning issues. And warning issues are always on audit reports from A360 because they're part of the WCAG guidelines. However, for a multitude of different reasons, you don't necessarily maybe always fix every single flagged WCAG violation. We can pick that conversation up later, but that's what I would tell you about, if you want me to put a stick in, where it is, that's really the reality of it. And also I'll say this, and then I really will pass it on. If you are overwhelmed with the thought of that, get an audit, find out where you are. Don't do nothing because you don't know how to get to the finish line. Work with your agency and credible subject matter expert partners to get an actual audit done so that you're aware of the issues, because I find that business owners, they don't necessarily know everything they need to do. So then that keeps them from making even the first step. And I'd encourage everybody to take that first step.
No, that's awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Paul, I'm gonna have you lead off on from the agency perspective. What is the standard of accessibility, and what does it take to reach them? I know you and I've had conversations. I'll let you lead off, Paul, and then Andrew. Love to get your feedback on this as well.
Yeah, you bet. I think from our perspective, it's driven a bit by the client or the merchant and their size and what their goals are. We've run audits for all of our current clients and speak to all of our prospects about the web accessibility and their site. So it's definitely part of the way that we approach things. We run to the standards that Michelle was alluding to. We believe in, some higher level human testing. So for, companies that are looking to get into that higher level of accessibility and compliance, referring out to companies like, Michelle's is our suggestion, and really working with subject matter experts and people that have, some more legal advice included in their expertise. But generally speaking, we run an accessibility report, make suggestions to our customers, and put a plan in place. And I think that the first real line of defense is that knowledge and just understanding what's going on there and having the conversation around it and putting a plan in place so that they can document what they're doing. And if they ever do get that letter, there's at least the path of showing that you care and you're trying to do the right thing.
And Andrew, I'll let you chime in, because I do have a follow-up question for.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. I would say, like so many things, the first step is admitting you have a problem as a brand, that you got something there. If you trace back sort of the origins of some of these initiatives, we think back to, there are three areas that we sort of look at as areas that historically merchants saw as, cost centers and not non-value add, that they were reticent to engage in until unless there was a problem. And those areas are data privacy, security, and accessibility, right? They were an additional cost on your SOW that they couldn't see driving ROI. So accepting that, there are many reasons why merchants should make their sites accessible. There are a lot of motivations around it, and certainly the goal is to make it accessible so everyone can shop on the site. But assuming that's the end goal and that's the motivation for it, there are other motivations, as Paul and Michelle noted, including the legal ramifications, right? What are the risks of not having your site, WCAG compliant? I'm sure I'm butchering the proper legal terms, Michelle. And my understanding is, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, on the ADA side, that is not something, despite there being laws in place that govern it in some capacity, it's not the U.S. government that's enforcing ADA on brands. It's sort of socially policed at this time by law firms that are out there suing, searching for, mining, and looking for any site that has a violation. So this is not a long, drawn out process where over time they accumulate it. This is quick hits that they're going out and just suing people left and right. So maybe I guess you'll probably get to this, and me and Michelle talk through what that looks like. But for us, what does success look like? It starts with, as I said, acknowledging you have a problem and rolling out a roadmap to get to your end goal, irrespective of the motivation to get there. Because this is not an overnight fix. This is a process to understand where you're deficient and what you need to do to get there. And it needs to be done in baby steps. You cannot do this in one fell swoop. And showing that progress, as Paul said, is something that is good because you're making your site more accessible to folks who need those accommodations, but also you're also protecting yourself legally, because if you're making progress, you are less likely to be a target, or you're not as easy a target as if you're doing nothing. So that answered your question.
That's great. And guys, Michelle, Paul, Andrew, obviously, using the idea that, hey, we've got a problem, let's fix it, or let's find a way to fix it. Where does the responsibility come from? Because obviously, merchants are constantly updating their sites. They may be, re-platforming, they may be moving, to other, other agencies. Would you guys say, and again, it's a loaded question because you guys are agencies, but should the merchant themselves be aware of this? Because there are a lot of agencies out there, as we know, who may not be super well versed on this. Where does the responsibility really fall? Will it fall on the from that standpoint, the customer? Or I'd love to hear what you guys come about, because obviously you get a lot of requests from customers. Really, should the customer be aware of it and have that part of their questions when they're deciding on an agency or a development team from that standpoint?
We're finding it much more common that within scope of work requests or projects that come our way, that people are more aware of it and inquiring about it or wanted to be included in the conversation, which I think is a good sign. It's not 100% now, but it is becoming much more common to have it be part of the conversation.
I would say I feel it is the onus and the sort of social responsibility, professional responsibility is on the agency to educate their clients. But certainly, as Michelle, I'm sure will jump in, legally, Michelle, who is responsible?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm here to defend agencies a little bit, and even kind of bring up the topic about e-commerce platforms and kind of how it all fits together. Because at the end of the day, I do want to go back to something that Andrew said. In my personal opinion, I'm not giving anybody any legal advice at all today, but in my personal opinion and my professional experience, I'm not convinced that every plaintiff attorney properly evaluates a website before they send a demand letter or a lawsuit. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, the demand letters are pretty much the same regardless of who gets them. And so you can kind of cover up the top of it. And we've seen so many, you can look and you go, oh, that's from so-and-so and that's from so-and-so. I have mixed feelings on that because number one, most websites are not compliant. Most websites are not usable by a myriad of people with disabilities. It's getting way better. Even in 5-6 years, it's gotten a ton better. There's a lot more awareness like we've talked about. But proper method of assessment and proper method of remediation are definitely something I think we're going to cover today. And I can't wait to talk about the proper method of remediation. Paul talked originally about doing some test on the agency level. And I'm assuming, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you're running like a scanning tool through, right? Like a SaaS product, looking for some low hanging fruit and seeing kind of at a quick glance if there's some things that you can fix. There's nothing wrong with that. What you need to understand about scanning tools is a lot of them will scan for AAA issues, and you shouldn't waste time, energy, or money fixing those necessarily because AAA is very pie in the sky. It might make your design look different. Also, scanning tools, all of them return false positives, and so you should make sure that you're investing time and resources on actual issues. And then the third thing is, scanning tools only cover a portion of the test. Right. So if you do it, everybody just needs to understand what is that method, right? It's like doctoring or medicine. What is the proper diagnosis? Proper diagnosis, in our opinion, and many others, if you really want to know the full truth, you need to get a full live user audit. But a lot of companies will assess their risk and they'll say, well, agency, can you just, do what you can? And we appreciate it. One question I want to toss back in a second to the guys is I see a lot of clients go through the process of a new build, for example, with an agency. And especially if you can talk about accessibility and you have competency, I see a lot of clients at the end of it say, we just don't have the budget to make it accessible. Just do the best job you can. And that's where I would really caution agencies to stop and say, you need to decide whether you do or you don't build a product to accessibility, but I would not suggest agencies be in that gray area. And the second thing about agencies, which neither of these do, is you shouldn't proclaim to be an auditor, right? Don't impersonate an auditor. You got a whole business plan and risk and everything all on your own. So let the auditing fall to an auditing company. That's one of the best things that I can say. I worry about our agency partners sometimes when, back to the original question, if clients try to hold them responsible. The business owner is responsible for the legal operation of their business entity. Now, I've seen agencies get countersued when a client gets sued. That's a mess. I think the way to stay away from that is to never profess to be and just kind of keep rerouting them to the correct special doctor, right? Like you guys are general practitioners, I'm an oncologist, right? That kind of thought process. And so more awareness to the client. I can't talk about this topic without bringing in third-party elements though, right? So you've got, where does accessibility creep in? Well, you've got an e-commerce platform, and then you either have a theme or you have like a certain, part of that. And then you do a lot of custom stuff on top of it. And then the client can slip in these apps afterwards, and it becomes like this ecosystem of who owns what and what's going on. So I'll start at the basis. Choose an e-commerce platform that's committed to accessibility. I think both of you guys work with Shopify. Can't say enough good things about them. Lots of other great, accessible, enabling e-commerce platforms out there, but that's where it starts, right? And then what the agency does, and then be careful what the client does with aftermarket apps. Scott Venkel at Shopify, somebody we work with all the time, on a recent webinar with us and on a blog that you can find on our website, talked about the apps in the marketplace, right, for Shopify. He's not endorsing that they're fully accessible. They're in there in an open market space. So just, be an informed purchaser, be an informed partner, be an informed practitioner. And, there's only things to gain by being open and honest. So I'll stop there because I know we have a bunch of other questions to cover, but
no, great stuff for sure. Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, let's say I'm a merchant. I got the letter from a lawyer.
Yeah.
What's next? And Michelle, I'm going to turn to Paul and Andrew first because I know you have some really great thoughts about this as well. But I'd love to start with Paul. I got the letter. I'm a merchant. What do I do? And then Andrew, I'll turn it over to you because I'd love to get your feedback on this as well.
Yeah, at that point, you definitely want to engage an expert, someone, that's qualified and a skilled, in an agency that focuses on it, someone like Michelle's group or the like. We would be involved in the sense that we would be a resource then for whatever was identified and whatever the path to a resolution was. But definitely engaging in the expert. They are doing this every day. And as you can tell from how eloquently Michelle's speaking about it and deeper knowledge is that, that's definitely where you want to land. I think folks like Andrew and ourselves can give some advice and guidance and do some strategic checking, like, Michelle was alluding to. We're utilizing some tools, and sort of our best practices to get to a level of guidance. But at that point, you definitely want to engage in an expert that can give legal advice and guidance on how to defend.
And I guess, Paul, before I turn it to Andrew, so I know you guys have worked with clients that have gotten that letter. What is sort of the, obviously we look at you guys as doctors, right? I got the letter, I have this issue, I go see you. What are sort of the initial things that you guys do to begin with? I mean, how do you unwrap that? Because it could be overwhelming as well, because, obviously whenever you get a letter as a merchant from a legal entity, you're busy running your business, obviously Q4, we're going to probably see a huge spike in this just based off the way the trends are going. What is something that I know you guys do really, really well that, first of all, puts the merchant at peace of mind, but also would love to hear like what's sort of that initial conversation looks like, if you can share that, if that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, peace of mind is pretty challenging. I mean,
Yeah.
The unrest is there.
Yeah.
If it's a client that, that has come to us because of the situation, it may be a different conversation than if we're dealing with, someone whose site we've built or that we're, more intimate with their tech stack or what they've got going on. But I think that, doing a quick analysis or having a conversation about, the current status of the site, and then, making sure that we can introduce them or find a partner to work with so that they're comfortable with next steps, and then being a resource for that. But, there isn't any magic wand you can, wave, unfortunately, that makes someone comfortable once they've, gotten a lawsuit letter about something that they probably or very possibly know zero about it, up until the fact, that they got the letter. So really it's about just assuring them that we've done this before and we can help you from here moving forward, and make sure that, you have a team in place that can guide you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you, and then quickly, Michelle, because I know the next question, a few of our audience members are wanting to get at, but I want to definitely give enough time for this, because I don't want viewers or, future, viewers of this webinar to feel like they're helpless from that standpoint once they get.
So what do we do if we have a client who gets a threat letter, was the question, correct?
Yeah.
I guess like a true New Yorker, I would say, I got a guy for you, or a gal in this situation.
Yeah.
If we trace back the origin of some of these, or not some of these, but this movement, 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, when this sort of started hitting our radar on a regular basis, it was very much that the sentiment in the ecosystem was, well, if we're not the fastest car on the highway, we're not going to get pulled over, right? At that time, it was the large enterprise brands that were the ones getting these threat letters and lawsuits. And the folks sort of lower down in the mid-market SMBs were sort of like, oh, well, if we keep our head down, we won't get touched by this. And then, the firms that are sort of depleted, the top level enterprise brands, they basically started working their way down through the ecosystem. And now at this point, there are few merchants, if any, that haven't gotten some semblance of a threat letter or notification. It is, if you haven't, you're the exception, you're not the norm. Now, if we look at what these firms are doing, few of them are truly fighting the good fight and are altruistic and really want there to be a movement toward accessibility, because there are these, more often than not, and I'll defer to Michelle to talk more about it, these are not large enough amounts that many of these companies will say, you know what, we need to fight this because this is material revenue, right? They're small enough that it can be, just settle and we'll move on. It's not enough for us to really get caught up in it. And where the brands sort of, the risk there is, if you settle, there's, you're not exempt from a future loss. There's no double jeopardy involved here. You can get sued 15 times for the same thing if you're settling out of court. And I'll turn over to Michelle, because I know she has a lot of information about what many merchants do and versus what many merchants ought to be doing when they get these threat letters. So we absolutely, when our clients get these letters, this is, as Michelle said, it's not always because the sites are non-compliant or that they're accurate in their assessment of them. They're just looking for a quick and fast settlement and move on. But with that, I guess, open the door for Michelle.
Yeah. Well, I can just add to that real quick before Michelle, you jump in. One of the things that you said the other day when we were all speaking was how you could essentially make a board of, the different legal entities and the different, clients or types of clients, and match them up sort of like the match game, just based on experience and the same thing happening over and over again. So it's not really relevant to a size of a company anymore or anything. It's really just more about the lawyers throwing darts and hoping to capture a percentage from our experience.
Yeah.
I think you also said, Michelle, that you can actually predict somewhat if they hit verticals at a certain swath, right? They're looking at certain industries. So you can actually say, oh, they're after the baby food industry this month, kind of thing. So yeah.
You guys are letting just all the secrets out of the bag. Yeah. So in my experience, again, as I said earlier, I have mixed feelings about the plaintiff's bar activities. And I think all plaintiff attorneys are on the spectrum. And I mean that some of them are very much interested in advocacy for people with disabilities. And they're taking really large cases like Lainey Feingold, who sued, baseball and the NFL. And then she works a structured settlement. And it's not confrontational. It's all about education and awareness and coming to a better place so that when people know better, they can do better. And incidentally, hands down, merchants, we're talking about e-commerce, but across all business verticals, I can count on one hand in 6 years, literally of the thousands of companies, almost every single solitary one, once they know better, they want to do better. Now, getting the letter is an opportunity to learn that you have a potential to do better, right? And so I have, it definitely has raised the awareness that the internet was not accessible. So if I sit in the middle and I say, what's the good, bad, and ugly of this? The good is there's a hell of a lot more awareness. And so thanks. The bad is companies can get hit out of nowhere. They can't afford to do this. They don't know what to do. Or somebody's trying to sell them some kind of snake oil and they waste a bunch of money and time and they don't do it correctly. And I think we're going to get to that soon. But the third thing is, it's when you get a letter, I'll use a sports analogy, your best defense overall. And again, I am not your attorney. If you get a letter, call your attorney. Ask us for a referral to attorneys that we work with who specialize in this, because there's some top-notch ones who deal with this and are used to dealing in this that do a really good job. I'm not going to settle and I'm not going to litigate. No vendor is going to do that for you. You need, when you get the letter, you have two projects. You have to settle it if you choose to engage in the demand letter. The demand letter says, we are fixing to sue you. And if you don't want to be sued, you can work on a settlement. A lawsuit is an actual lawsuit that you do need to litigate, right? That's the difference between the two types of envelopes you can get. I also agree that's a matter of time that anybody with a website is going to get hit. And I do admit to seeing trends and what genres of businesses are going after. Absolutely. So all that said, and my bipartisan, thank you for bringing the awareness up, plaintiffs bar. Here's the reality. If you didn't practice the strongest defense that you can possibly initiate, which is a strong offense, right? Your best defense is a strong offense. And what I mean by that is get an assessment, put some money towards this. Don't just hope that you're not going to be the car that's out front that the cop sees. Do some work on it. Ask your agency to do some work. Ask us to do some agency, to do some work, get some information about it. But you have two projects when you get a letter. You have to litigate and or settle whatever you're going to choose to do on that and your lawyers are choose to do. And then you need to go about fixing your website. And that's where we get to work a lot together. And that to me is the best part, because in every engagement with an agency team and a client team, we are teaching a minimum probably of 2 to 10 people how to do this. And then those 2 to 10 people know it for another client. And then word spreads. And I would like everybody from the agency world to think about this for a second. We didn't used to have websites that fit every size phone. I'm old enough to remember that. I think the guys on the phone are old enough to remember that, although I'm not sure about Paul, but I think so. There was a tipping point that happened, and out of necessity, invention was born, and that was responsive web design. Accessible design isn't going anywhere. We're going to age completely dependent on our technology, and that means all of us are going to develop a disability. Don't stick your head in the sand and pretend that this isn't going to affect you. If it hasn't affected you, you're really not out in front, probably. And I don't mean that in a mean way or a bad way, but I mean, goodness, all of us can speak to people who have been hit with this, right? And so it's not going to go away. Humans are not going to stop using digital products. Please design them with universal design and development. That's all we're here to talk about.
Perfect.
Right?
Thanks, Michelle. The next question, and we have actually two audience questions that parlay this as well. But first, tools to use to be accessible. I know we brought that up. You guys have all shared, tools to be accessible. I'd love to get your initial thoughts of which ones they can use, and then if we could sort of keep a little bit of our answers succinct, I'd like to get to some of the attendees' questions because they're both regarding tools. So, Paul, I'll start with you if you have any insights about tools that like a merchant can use to be accessible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tools out there. I think that to Michelle's point earlier, that they only do a really surface level of checking and may give false information. And so there's no scan it real quick and you're compliant, or exactly what you need to do to be compliant. Lighthouse is a tool that I know our team utilizes. Maybe Andrew or Michelle have other suggestions, but for people that are interested, you can Google it, and there's plenty of tools out there. It's just really a question of how thorough a job it's doing and if it's giving you the information you're looking for.
Cool. Andrew, quickly to you, and then
Michelle. I would say, like Michelle sort of alluded to, we would use a tool. Wave is one of the ones that you can use as a thermometer to tell you if you have a temperature, right? But you still need to see a doctor to find out why you're sick and to fix the problem. So those are sort of nice tools to go, okay, well, how am I doing? And based on the results you make, I'm not doing great generally. And then that's when we bring in, but we certainly overlays, third-party tools will not get a merchant where they need to be to truly be not just protected legally, but compliant, which is really what, accessible, which is really what the goal is here.
Yeah, so there's tools for testing and there's tools out there that profess that they can fix everything on the fly for you. So I'll talk about the testing tools right away. Color contrast scanning tools, great, use those, run those. Design teams, understand what the minimum font requirements are for your color contrast. Don't do what the Minnesota Wild did, no offense Minnesota Wild, but put green and red together, right? Don't do the obvious stuff. Like, be informed about design and use a tool that you get good results from for color contrast tools. We're a live user auditing firm, so I'm not going to endorse any tools out there, right? The guys got a chance to talk about which ones. They're reputable. Wave has been around a ton. It's free. Download it. I will call attention to the specific terms and use of the Wave tool. And if you read it, it says you cannot use it to determine the accessibility of a website. So they are honest too. Use honest tools. Site Improve is a company that happens to have an office in Minnesota. They're also very honest about the limitations of their scanning tool. And like both gentlemen have said, and most people in this business realize, you cannot use a tool to determine accessibility. You have to use a human. So I think we're going to move to the overlays. I think there's a lot to talk about with overlays. I'll just start with this, and I'll let, if you guys want to talk about stories or experiences you've had. As a live user auditing firm, we have audited every overlay tool out there. We have yet to find one that is the magic wand. There is no tool out there that magically fixes compliance or usability in the audits that we have performed. I can't speak to every instance out there on the web. I wouldn't do that. That would be reckless and it's not professional. But in every instance where we've audited them, overlay tools can cause really big issues for people who are screen reader users. And again, I'll bring you back to my introduction. People who have a disability severe enough to benefit from accessible design and development are already using assistive technology, or they'd never get to your website. So the thought of putting something on your website in case a blind user gets there so they can use it is ridiculous, because the blind user would never get there. They're already using assistive technology. What you need to do is make your code work for a myriad of different accessibility enabled AT assistive technologies like screen readers, refreshable braille displays, sip and puff. Think about people with physical disabilities and not being able to use a mouse. So there's been a lot of people that have jumped into the industry, and I'll turn it over to the guys to maybe share some personal experiences if they'd like, or Amit, if you want to ask a more specific.
Yeah, I think both questions, I'll read them aloud. I think we've covered both of these. One question was, would you suggest tools using automations to make your sites accessible for everyone? Or do you think this is always something which should be in the hands of the owner? I think we covered this earlier, but if there was any maybe thoughts that we missed, or, things that you guys wanted to add to that, I'd like to give you guys the floor to on this question.
So quickly, before we get to that, Michelle, I think there was one other thing we discussed a couple of months ago, which was that other method that people use, which is having a separate experience for folks with disabilities.
Yeah.
So if you talk a little briefly about that and the whole other quagmire of legal ramifications of inherently discriminatory practices.
So there used to be a picture in our deck when we started the company, and it was of a high school hallway in the 60s. And there were certain areas for certain group of people and certain areas for other groups of people. And the concept that you would put human beings through one digital door and other human beings based on having a disability through a different digital door, in my opinion, is ridiculous. There's no reason for it. In addition, there's been cases like Scandinavian Airlines and several others where live user auditing has proven that separate but so-called equal website was not offering equitable access. To owners of websites, operators, and agencies, I would pose the question, why would you want two websites to keep up? One that you're constantly changing, and one you have to circle back to. I mean, we could talk a whole hour about how big companies did that, where they got their accessibility lift often was in their mobile, and they kind of made that more of their desktop experience. Anyway, technologically, there's no reason to put people through two different doors. If you're going to work that hard, just make your website, the one website, work for everybody and allow everyone to be in the same audience. But there's definitely settlements and some case law out there in regards to those. So,
Cool. Thanks, Michelle.
yep. And also think about it. If somebody with a disability comes to your website and the first thing they do is they get slammed with a door that says, you can't use the assistive technology you know how to use, you got to go try this thing. What do you think the adoption or engagement rate there is going to be? I think the bounce rate is going to be through the roof. So
Well,
think about the user.
Oh,
Yeah,
I wanted to chime in. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just, kind of back to the original thing that I was talking about with that, brick and mortar mentality and just the methodology of like, ask yourself the simple question, like, would you ever do that? Can you imagine if you had a brick and mortar store and you had one door for, everybody to walk into except for, people that had disabilities, which, by the way, we haven't talked about from a data standpoint, but, like 1 in 4 adult Americans in the US is the number that I saw more recently have some sort of disability. And so we're not talking about like a small chunk of society here, which it really shouldn't matter anyways. But, at the end of the day, we're talking about a pretty significant amount of potential customers and also just flat out doing the right thing. But having that, kind of brick and mortar, circle it back to that example and ask yourself, if it was a brick and mortar experience, would you offer this or how would you do it? And oftentimes it plays well into decision making for your e-commerce experience.
Yeah, and just because companies have jumped into the marketplace saying, hey, you could do this, it doesn't mean it's a viable or valid solution. It means that somebody has started a business to offer it as, an option. But again, I just love what Paul's saying. Just stop and breathe for a minute and think about what you're doing. First of all, people don't have to be completely disabled to benefit from universal design and equitable access initiatives, right? 1 in 10 men are colorblind. Aging eyes will have a hard time with light blue and darker blue. Be real careful in your design. And I think too often people think about accessibility too much in an absolute, like it either is or it isn't accessible. A website, an e-commerce website, can be incredibly or fully usable by somebody who is blind using screen reader technology, and it's not necessarily compliant to the WCAG guidelines. I think we should just out that. I think we should talk about that. I think we should be honest with people. When you get into a legal, situation, whatever the settlement terms are, you have to abide by those. So if it is, get a letter of conformance, that's your legal requirement. But please understand that there's a tremendous amount of usability on the internet, even though the site isn't compliant. A quick example would be autocomplete forms, right? JAWS, understand how assistive technology works, like understand your user. It's gonna make an educated guess that this is first name and last name. And even if you don't have them labeled correctly, lots of people can fill out autocomplete forms that aren't, or, form fields that aren't done correctly. So.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. So we're almost at time. So I want to make sure that we're allowed to give forward-thinking, advice to you from your guys' perspective. So main takeaways for the end of the year, how agencies like Overdose, SeaMonster Studios can help, and what do you suggest would be the next steps to make sure everyone's websites are compliant? So I know that's a very broad-reaching question, but I want to definitely put a bow on all of our discussion. Obviously, if any of our attendees want to have further discussions, I'll make sure that we provide your guys' contact information. But for Paul and Andrew, love to get that step. Like, what are the major takeaways when we look at the end of the year? What would you guys suggest? And then Michelle, I'll let you wrap it up from that standpoint.
You want to go ahead, Andrew?
I'll go for it, man.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, for me, the thing for people to think about and the biggest takeaway is knowledge is power. And, doing the right thing, I think, comes inherently. If people were asked, would you do it this way or would you do it that way? They're going to do it inherently for the right reasons to make sure that it's accessible for people if they have the opportunity and understand what's going on. And so the more we can spread the word, more we can do events like this, the more agencies that are out there, like Overdose and SeaMonster Studios, who are, educating everybody that comes in the door now, opposed to it really not being a conversation, not too long ago, having experts like, Accessible 360 out there that really just, live and breathe this stuff and can be a resource for all of us as we get into the, deeper waters with merchants, would be my thought. It's just, if you own a business and you have a web presence, you need to be aware of web accessibility and, take your own stance or make your own practices, but do something about it. Don't do nothing.
Yeah, really well said. I think if as a merchant or anyone who has a digital property, if you've yet to engage in any accessibility compliance work, you're not compliant. Let's face it. So our recommendation would be, run a third-party scan. Don't panic and start to triage, because you got to start somewhere. You got to start, dealing with the big rocks first, and then have that roadmap. And as you go into 2022, frankly, this industry is going to be very busy come Q1 across the board. Any digital initiative, it's going to be a pretty big wave coming. So recommendation would be to start this conversation now, to get your roadmap in place. Even if you don't start the work till 2022, have that conversation now to understand where you stand, what your risk is, what the liability is, and frankly, what the steps are, to take to get to a point where your digital property is accessible to more and more folks, and you're also protecting yourself legally.
No, I would say break it down. First of all, decide who owns it. Decide if you're going to spend money on it, because you can talk about this all you want, and unless you have money aside for it, you ain't ever going to get it. It's not going to happen. So decide who owns it, and also make it a corporate initiative, right? Decide, are you going to be a brand that enables the civil rights of every human being to participate in your digital environment or not? Start there. Post an accessibility statement on your website that says you intend to improve the user experience for all users. And we've got great examples of well-written accessibility statements. Don't wait to post one that says you are compliant. It's not binary like that, right? As my CTO, Kelly Heckler, would say, it's not you either are or you're not. Make progress. I can't encourage enough proper diagnosis, and only spend money when you know that what you're doing is first of all, needs to be done. And second of all, is going to be done the right way, right? With a good subcontractor as an auditor and a good agency partner. Make sure that when you get diagnosed, that you follow that treatment protocol. I had a summary slide on what to do next. And actually, Paul said one of them too, don't panic. To that, I would add, what not to do. Don't do nothing. Do not install an overlay tool. Do start looking at your third-party providers, your loyalty programs, your HR portals, anything that you're plugging in. And when you're signing that contract with that third-party vendor, tell them, we offer accessibility or intend to offer accessibility and equitable access to everyone. To be in our yard, you also have to play by our rules. Like, go back to that simple analogy. And that is, if you're going to provide me a date picker or a calendar or, a calculator or a review or whatever, or a chat functionality, you also have to be committed to accessibility. Show me proof that you have a letter of conformance. So, make a decision. Put money towards it. Take steps when you know that you have the proper diagnosis and you have the proper path forward, like the guys are saying. Don't do nothing. And, again, increase the awareness and education, like we said. More and more questions are welcome. So.
That's great. And I really appreciate Michelle, Paul, Andrew. I want to give you guys the ability to our panelists to put your guys' email in the chat, because obviously we have attendees who would love to learn more from you guys, again, to breed a conversation potentially, I want to give that opportunity. So if you guys are able to put your email addresses in the chat, that would be great. And again, for any of the attendees that do watch this and in the future you want to be connected to Overdose, to SeaMonster, to Michelle, we at Omnisend will definitely make that available for you guys as well, because we know how important this topic is. But I really want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day. I know it's, Q4, it's a busy time of year for everyone, but definitely appreciate our panelists' time today and your thoughts and insights. So just want to thank our attendees as well, but I just want to say thanks, guys. Thanks for educating me as well on this, because this is definitely something that's really been a focus of mine over the last few months after talking to you guys as a whole.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Amit, Omnisend, and Paul. I know you guys really put this together. Michelle certainly always learns something every time we talk to you. It's enlightening. So it was an honor to be part of the panel, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Amit, great job, and appreciate you including SeaMonster Studios.
Always, guys. Well, thanks, guys. Be well. Have a great holiday season, and can't wait to see everyone's success in Q4 and start of 2022.
We'll be back here in 1 year.
Exactly.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye, guys.
All right, guys, take care.
Bye.
Bye.